Zane had always been one to think quickly under pressure. As a young engineer aboard a human exploration ship, he was used to being calm in unexpected situations, but nothing could have prepared him for this. The ship had been cruising through the galaxy on a routine mission when disaster struck. Without warning, a massive, unexplained energy burst rocked their ship. Zane had felt the ship shudder beneath him, a violent shake that rattled the entire vessel. Warning lights flashed and alarms screamed in the narrow corridors of the ship. The crew scrambled to stabilize the systems, but it was clear. The ship was going down. Zane barely had time to secure himself in his seat before the ship's final descent began. The world outside the windows turned into a blur as the ship plummeted toward the surface of an uncharted planet. The control panels exploded in a blaze of sparks, and with a deafening crash, the ship slammed into the planet's surface. When Zane opened his eyes, the world around him was chaos. Smoke billowed through the air, and the crackle of flames could be heard from deep within the wreckage. The air outside the ship was thick and strange, unlike anything he had ever breathed before. His head ached and his body felt heavy, but he knew he had to move. There was no time to waste. The crew needed him. He fumbled with the control panel to open the emergency hatch. It hissed as it slowly slid open, and Zane pushed himself out, stumbling as he made his way into the unfamiliar landscape. The ground beneath his boots was soft, almost spongy, and the air had a metallic smell that made him gag. The planet was unlike anything he had seen before. The sky was a deep purple, and strange glowing plants dotted the landscape, their light flickering like fireflies in the night. Zane's heart raced as he searched for other survivors, but all he could see were the remnants of the crashed ship. Smoke rose from what used to be the cargo hold, and he could hear distant, muffled cries of his fellow crew members. It was then that he realized just how isolated they were. No one else would be able to help them. They were alone on an unknown world, with no way to communicate with the rest of the galaxy. He had to act quickly. As he moved forward, Zane suddenly froze. Ahead of him, standing amidst the wreckage, was a figure, tall, imposing, and unlike anything he had ever seen. She was covered in dark, leathery armor, and her skin shimmered with an unnatural sheen. Her eyes glowed, piercing through the smoke, and her long silver hair flowed like a river in the wind. She was stunning and terrifying. There was something ancient about her, something that made the hairs on the back of Zane's neck stand on end. For a moment, neither of them moved. Zane's heart pounded in his chest as the figure stepped closer, her footsteps silent against the soft ground. There was an eerie calm to her movements, as if she were in complete control of the situation. Zane tried to steady his breathing, but it was difficult. The air was thick with tension. "You're a long way from home, human," the figure said, her voice low and smooth, carrying an almost melodic quality. It was a voice that seemed to both comfort and unsettle at the same time. Zane swallowed, trying to gather his thoughts. "I don't know where I am." "My ship crashed. We need help." The woman tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "Help?" she repeated, as if she found the concept amusing. "You've crash-landed on my planet. I don't give help." "I take what I need." Zane's mind raced. He had heard rumors of a dangerous alien species in this part of the galaxy. The Vampira, a race of vampire-like aliens known for their ruthlessness and power. The stories about them were enough to make anyone fearful. They were said to have strength beyond that of any human, and they had no mercy for those who crossed them. But he hadn't expected to encounter one so soon. "Look, I don't want any trouble," Zane said quickly, trying to keep his voice calm. "I just need to get in touch with my crew." "If you could help us—" The woman stepped forward suddenly, closing the distance between them in the blink of an eye. Zane took a step back, startled by her speed. "I'm not interested in your crew, human," she said, her voice now sharp and cold. "I've dealt with your kind before." "You humans are weak, and I have no use for weakness.
Zane's mind raced.
He had to think fast. If he couldn't talk his way out of this, he'd have to fight. And he wasn't prepared for that. But then, a thought struck him. He needed to do something unexpected. Something that would throw her off guard. Without thinking, Zane blurted out, "Your butt is beautiful." The words left his mouth before he could stop them. For a moment, everything was silent. The woman froze, her eyes widening ever so slightly. Zane's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't believe he had just said that. The last thing he had expected was for the alien woman to react like this. The woman's lips parted, revealing sharp white teeth that glinted in the dim light. She studied him for a moment, her gaze intense and unreadable. Then, surprisingly, she let out a soft chuckle, something Zane had not expected. "You're different?" she said, her tone no longer hostile, but rather curious. "Most of your kind would cower before me, but you speak without fear. That amuses me." Zane blinked, still unsure if he had just narrowly avoided death or made a complete fool of himself. I didn't mean to offend you. I was just, trying to keep things light." The woman's eyes sparkled with amusement. "You don't know how lucky you are, human," she said, her voice now more playful than threatening. "No one else has dared speak to me like that. Most would die for less." Zane swallowed, his mind still reeling from the encounter. He had no idea what was happening, but for now, it seemed like he had earned a reprieve from her wrath. The woman stepped back, her posture still graceful, but her eyes never left him. "What's your name, human?" she asked, her tone more curious than before. "Zane," he replied, still trying to catch his breath. "Zane," she repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "I am Lyra, the last of my kind." Lucky I find you interesting." Zane blinked again, still trying to make sense of the situation. "Interesting? Why?" Lyra's smile faded slightly, her expression turning more serious. "Because, unlike the others, you have no fear of me. That makes you useful. Perhaps, in time, you will prove to be something more." Zane had no idea what that meant, but he knew one thing for certain. His encounter with the wild alien vampire woman was only just beginning. Zane's mind raced as Lyra's words hung in the air. She was the last of her kind, a vampire alien with a deadly reputation, and she was curious about him. He still wasn't sure whether that curiosity was a good thing or a very bad one, but for now, he had no choice but to go along with whatever this strange encounter had become. He glanced around, trying to get his bearings. The wreckage of the ship still smoldered in the distance, and the crew members were nowhere in sight. Panic flared inside him for a moment. What had happened to the others? Were they alive? Was he the only one left? Lyra seemed to notice his unease, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly. "You're worried about your crew?" she said, almost as if reading his thoughts. "Don't be. They're not your concern anymore. Your survival is." Zane blinked, her words hitting him harder than he expected. "What do you mean?" "We can't just leave them here. We have to find them." Lyra's eyes darkened as she stared at him. "There are more important things than your weak human attachments, Zane. You've crashed on my planet. You'll need to prove yourself if you want to survive here." Zane felt a surge of frustration, but he held it back. It was clear that Lyra didn't care about his crew, and there was little he could do to change that. He had to focus on getting through this moment and figuring out a way to make it out alive. He needed to find his people, but he also needed to stay alive long enough to do that. She turned to walk deeper into the strange landscape, and Zane followed. He didn't know where she was taking him, but he had no choice but to follow her lead. The planet around them was nothing like Earth. The sky was a deep purple, and strange plants and creatures moved in the distance. Some plants glowed faintly, while others seemed to shift and change shape as if they had a mind of their own. The atmosphere was thick, and the air was heavy with the scent of something alien and unfamiliar. Zane tried to keep up, his legs already tired from the crash, but he didn't want to show any weakness in front of Lyra. She had already shown him that she wasn't someone to be underestimated. She was fast, strong, and seemingly unbothered by the strange environment. She walked with the grace of someone who was completely at home in this alien world. After a while, they reached a clearing. In the center of it stood what looked like a large structure, though it wasn't made of any material Zane had ever seen before. It seemed to pulse with an eerie, bioluminescent glow. Zane stepped forward cautiously. His curiosity piqued, despite the unease gnawing at him. "This is my home," Lyra said, as though reading his mind once again. It's not much, but it serves its purpose." Zane stared at the structure, unsure of how to respond. It looked otherworldly, alive even. The walls seemed to shift with every breath of wind, as if they were made from something organic rather than stone or metal. Zane wondered if this was how Lyra had survived on this planet all these years. It didn't look like a typical building, more like a living organism. "You live here alone?" Zane asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The thought of living on such an inhospitable planet was almost too much to bear. Lyra's expression didn't change. "Yes, I've been alone for a long time, but I don't need others. I've learned to thrive on my own." Zane nodded, unsure of what else to say. His mind was still racing with the implications of their meeting. What did she want with him? Why had she spared his life? Was it just curiosity, or was there something more? He had no answers, and he wasn't sure if he would ever get them. She led him inside the structure, which turned out to be much larger than it looked from the outside. The walls were covered in strange markings, almost like some kind of ancient language. The air inside was cool and dry, and Zane felt a sense of relief as he stepped into the shade. The temperature outside had been unbearable, and the sudden change in the atmosphere was almost a comfort. Lyra gestured for him to sit on a raised platform, made from the same material as the walls. "Rest," she said. "You'll need your strength if you're going to make it through what's to come." Zane hesitated for a moment, then sat down, exhaustion catching up with him. His body ached from the crash, and his head was spinning with the overwhelming sense of danger that surrounded him. But despite the tension, he couldn't help but feel an odd sense of curiosity about Lyra. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, cold and distant, yet strangely alluring. As he sat there, Lyra moved to the far side of the room, her movements smooth and calculated. She began to remove her armor, revealing her true form beneath. Zane had seen pictures of Vampira in the archives, but nothing could have prepared him for the sight of Lyra in person. Her skin was a deep, flawless shade of violet, her eyes still glowing with that same otherworldly light. Her body was slender but powerful, and her movements were graceful, like a predator preparing to strike. Zane quickly turned his gaze away, feeling embarrassed for having stared. He had to remind himself that she was dangerous, that everything about her was meant to keep him on edge. But there was something about her, something that pulled at him, that made him want to know more. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "So, what now?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts in his mind. Lyra turned back to him, her gaze piercing. "Now," she said slowly, "you prove your worth. You will help me, and in return I will help you. But don't mistake this for kindness. I do not owe you anything. If you fail, you will not survive." Zane nodded, his mind already running through the possibilities. "What do you need me to do?" Lyra's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "There are things on this planet that you will never understand, Zane. There are dangers beyond anything you've encountered, but you're resourceful, I can see that. You're not like the others." Zane didn't know what to make of that. What was she expecting from him? What could he possibly do that would be useful to someone like her? She paused, her eyes glinting with something unreadable. "I'll teach you. You'll learn what it means to survive in a world like this. And if you're lucky, you may just become more than a pawn in my game." Zane swallowed. He had no idea what kind of game she was playing. But he knew one thing for certain. He had no choice but to play along. Whatever Lyra's intentions were, they were the only chance he had of getting off this planet and back to his people. He would have to survive her and survive this alien world, no matter the cost. The next few days were a blur for Zane. Lyra kept him busy with a mixture of tasks that pushed his physical and mental limits. At first, he felt overwhelmed, unsure of how to keep up. But as the days passed, he began to understand that everything she did had a purpose. She wasn't just testing him. She was teaching him how to survive. She started with the basics. How to move through the harsh terrain of the planet, how to find water in the desert-like environment, and how to hunt. The planet wasn't kind to anyone, and Lyra had survived here for longer than anyone else could imagine. She moved with ease through the thick alien underbrush, her senses sharp and alert. Zane, on the other hand, struggled at first, often tripping over the uneven ground or getting tangled in the thick vines that seemed to grow faster than he could move. But Lyra never showed frustration. Instead, she watched him silently, her glowing eyes always focused on his movements. If he made a mistake, she would correct him with a few words, cold and precise, but never cruel. It was clear that she expected nothing less than his best. It was on the fourth day that she introduced him to something more dangerous. They had been walking for hours, the sun, if it could be called that, beating down on them in waves of oppressive heat. The air was thick with humidity, and the landscape stretched on endlessly. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of wind through the alien plants and the soft footfalls of Lyra as she moved ahead of him. Zane was beginning to tire when Lyra stopped suddenly. She turned to face him, her sharp gaze cutting through the heat of the day. "Do you see it?" she asked, her voice low and almost a whisper. Zane blinked, unsure of what she meant. "See what?" he asked, looking around the barren land. The landscape appeared still and untouched, with nothing moving in sight. Lyra's eyes never left his face. The danger. It's always around us. Zane turned back to look around, trying to spot whatever it was that had caught her attention. He could see nothing out of the ordinary. But as his eyes scanned the horizon, he noticed something moving. A shadow, dark and swift, cutting through the terrain like a blur. Before he could react, Lyra's hand shot out, grabbing his arm and pulling him down into the underbrush. Zane's heart raced as he struggled to keep up with her speed, barely managing to avoid tripping on the uneven ground. She pulled him into a crouch behind a large glowing plant that towered above them. They waited in silence, the world around them holding its breath. The shadow moved closer. Zane could hear its heavy footsteps, the ground vibrating beneath them. The creature was massive, its form only partially visible through the thick trees. It had the shape of a predator, but its features were unlike anything Zane had ever seen. It had long, gnarled limbs that seemed to bend and twist unnaturally, and its body was covered in thick, dark scales. Its eyes glowed an eerie red, scanning the area with a menacing intensity. Zane felt his breath catch in his throat. He had no idea what the creature was, but he knew one thing for certain. It was dangerous. Lyra, however, seemed unfazed. She crouched next to him, her body perfectly still, as if she were one with the landscape. Zane could feel her calmness radiating, and for a moment, he almost forgot how frightened he was. After what seemed like an eternity, the creature moved past them, its massive form disappearing into the distance. Zane let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His heart was still pounding in his chest, and he couldn't stop shaking. Lyra stood up first, her movements graceful and smooth. "That was a glimmer beast," she said, her voice steady. "It's one of the deadliest predators on this planet." "It's not something you can fight," you can only avoid it. Zane's mind raced. I've never seen anything like that before.
How do you survive with creatures like that around?
Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. You learn to adapt. You learn to respect the dangers of this world. The Glimmer Beast won't bother us if we don't cross its path again. But you, she said, pointing at him with a finger. You're weak. You need to be faster. You need to be smarter. Zane felt a surge of frustration. He wasn't used to being told that he was weak. But he also knew that Lyra wasn't wrong. He had to get better if he was going to survive this planet, and he had to do it fast. For the next few weeks, Lyra's lessons grew more intense. She taught him how to track creatures by their footprints, how to hunt smaller prey with minimal effort, and how to identify the plants that could either nourish him or poison him. She also taught him about the history of the planet, of the ancient civilizations that once called it home. One day, after another grueling training session, Zane sat beside a small fire, nursing his aching body. His muscles burned and his mind was exhausted, but there was a sense of accomplishment in having made it this far. Lyra sat across from him, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the fire. You've come a long way, she said, her voice almost approving. You're not the same human I found those days ago. You're stronger, more focused. Zane looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. What exactly do you want from me, Lyra? He asked, the question weighing on him. You've been training me, but I don't know why. What's your plan? Lyra's expression remained neutral, but there was something in her eyes that Zane couldn't quite place. My plan? You think I have a plan for you, Zane? Zane nodded. You've been teaching me all these survival skills, pushing me harder than I ever thought I could go. What's the point? Why are you doing this? Lyra's lips curled into a small smile. Maybe I'm just bored. Maybe I like the challenge of teaching someone like you. Or maybe, she paused, her gaze turning distant. Maybe there's more to this planet than you realize. There are others who want it. Others who want me to join their ranks, but I don't work with anyone. I don't bend to others' demands. I've learned that much.
Zane's curiosity flared. What do you mean?
Who are these others? Lyra's smile faded as she looked into the fire. You'll find out soon enough. The real test is yet to come, Zane. It's not just about surviving the planet. It's about surviving what's coming next. Zane sat in silence, unsure of what she meant. He had learned a lot from her, but now he realized there was so much more he didn't know. What was Lyra preparing him for? And what did the future hold for them both? As the fire crackled between them, Zane couldn't shake the feeling that the calm before the storm was ending. The true test was just beginning, and he was about to be drawn into something far bigger than he had ever imagined. Zane woke up to the sound of distant, eerie howls echoing through the night. His body was stiff from the training over the past few weeks, but the noise cut through the fog of sleep instantly. Lyra had warned him that the dangers of the planet didn't rest day or night, and that's exactly what he felt now, the weight of constant vigilance. He sat up, scanning the landscape. The alien world stretched out before him, a mixture of strange plants and towering rocks that cast long, dark shadows in the dim light. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and strange flowers that never seemed to bloom in the same way as those on Earth. The horizon was bathed in a purple glow, making the entire planet feel otherworldly. Lyra was already up, as always. She stood at the edge of their camp, her sharp eyes studying the dark horizon. Despite the late hour, there was no sign of fatigue on her face. She had become something Zane couldn't quite define. Part teacher, part enigma, and maybe, just maybe, something more than that. Zane rubbed his eyes, still adjusting to the early morning, but his curiosity was growing. What were the howls he'd heard? Lyra had never mentioned any creatures like that before. He had to ask. Lyra, Zane said, standing up. His voice cracked slightly from sleep, but he quickly cleared his throat. What was that noise? What kind of creatures make those sounds? She turned toward him, her gaze unreadable. It's the worms. They come out at night. You'll hear them more often as you get stronger, but don't let them find you. Her tone was matter-of-fact, as if talking about the weather. The way she spoke sent a shiver down Zane's spine. She had seen enough to know what came next, and she wasn't worried. Zane's curiosity burned. The worms? What are they? How do we fight them? Lyra's lips curved into a faint smile, but it wasn't a reassuring one. You don't fight them. You hide. If they sense you, you're done. Zane was taken aback. Hide? How can we hide from something like that? She stepped closer, her movements smooth and controlled. You'll learn. But the first lesson, Zane, is understanding that on this planet, sometimes it's better to survive by running than by fighting. You may think you're ready for battle, but trust me, you aren't. Zane's mind raced. This wasn't just survival. It was survival on a completely different level. He had learned how to track animals, how to avoid some of the more dangerous wildlife. But the worms sounded different. He wasn't sure if he could trust his instincts on something so deadly. What makes them so dangerous? He asked quietly, trying to get more information. Lyra glanced over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing. They're smart, fast, and they can sense the slightest movement or sound. You won't even see them coming until it's too late. We're safe here for now, but tomorrow we move. Zane swallowed, trying to absorb all of this. He could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. Lyra wasn't just teaching him survival skills. She was preparing him for the harshest elements of the planet. And the worms were just the beginning. As the sun, or what passed for the sun, began to rise, Lyra packed up their camp. Zane helped, still shaken by the new information, but he pushed those feelings aside. If he was going to make it, he had to stay focused. He couldn't afford to let fear dictate his actions. They set out on foot, moving through the dense underbrush with the kind of precision that only Lyra seemed to possess. Zane did his best to match her pace, but his body still ached from the last few days of grueling training. The alien landscape was even more oppressive up close. The air was thicker here, and the ground was uneven, filled with sharp rocks and vines that seemed to grab at his legs with every step. As they walked, Lyra spoke. There are things here, Zane, that you will never understand unless you see them with your own eyes. The Vampira, my people, have survived on this planet for generations. We've learned how to adapt, how to control the environment. But the planet also controls us. And if you want to live, you need to learn that balance. Zane nodded, but he didn't fully understand. He wasn't a vampire, not even close, but he had been thrown into this world with no way out. He had to find his own place in it. They continued walking for what felt like hours, the landscape never changing, an endless sea of strange plants and towering cliffs. Zane's legs were sore, and the heat was stifling, but he didn't dare complain. Lyra had taught him that complaining would get him nowhere. In this world, there was only survival, and there were no shortcuts. Eventually, they came to a stop at the edge of a deep ravine. The drop was steep, and the bottom was hidden in a thick fog. Zane could feel a strange energy in the air, something that made his skin prickle with unease. It was as if the very ground beneath them was alive, waiting for something. Lyra, however, seemed completely unbothered. She stood at the edge, peering down into the fog, her expression unreadable. "Down there," she said, her voice low, "lies the heart of the planet. It's where everything begins and ends." Zane took a step forward, drawn by the mystery of it all. "What is it? What's down there?" Lyra turned to him, her gaze piercing. "You don't need to know yet."
"You will when the time comes. For now, just trust me."
If you want to survive, You need to focus on the present. The past and future won't save you here. Zane tried to push past his curiosity, but it gnawed at him. What was this place? Why did Lyra call it the heart of the planet? And why was it so important? She seemed to read his thoughts again, as she often did. You'll learn in time, Zane. Everything has its place here. Even you. As they turned away from the ravine, Zane felt an unsettling sensation wash over him. It was as if something was watching them from the depths of the fog below. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being observed by something ancient and powerful, and that thought stayed with him as they continued on their journey. The next day, they moved again, this time further into the dense forest. The trees here were enormous, towering above them like ancient sentinels. The canopy blocked out most of the light, casting the forest floor in a shadowy gloom. Zane's senses were heightened, every rustle of leaves or distant sound putting him on edge. Lyra was always a few steps ahead, moving with an ease that made him feel like an amateur in comparison. They spent the day traveling through the dense woods, avoiding dangerous creatures and learning more about the planet's strange ecosystem. Zane began to understand the rhythm of the land, how the wind shifted, how the plants moved, and how to read the subtle signs of danger in the environment. He was getting better, faster, but he knew that there was still so much more to learn. By the time the sun set, they reached another clearing, a small, isolated spot where Lyra set up camp. Zane was exhausted, but there was a sense of accomplishment in having made it through another day. He felt stronger, more capable. But the journey was far from over. That night, as they sat by the fire, Lyra broke the silence. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice steady, "we face the worms. If you're not ready, you'll die. But if you are, you might just survive." Zane nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. The planet wasn't just a place. It was a battleground, and he was about to be tested in ways he could never have imagined. As the fire crackled between them, Zane couldn't help but wonder what else this world had in store. Lyra had taught him how to survive, but she had also taught him something else: to trust in himself, even when everything seemed impossible. Tomorrow would be the real test, and Zane knew he had to be ready.